Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is British Literature, Unit 1, and discussion number 1, and summary of discussion number 1. This is about basic literary terms that we need to know, and a similar discussion actually occurred in American literature, almost very, very close to the same. So I'm just going to go through my own personal notes and highlight some of the important things. So here we talk about some basic literary terms. The first thing to know is the difference between a topic of a poem or a piece of literary work versus the theme. Okay, so for example, the topic might be life, and the theme might be, okay, life is beautiful. Okay. Or another author might write about the topic of life, and they might say life, okay, is challenging or difficult. Okay, so that's the difference between a topic versus a theme. Theme is what the writer is saying about the topic. So this is what the writer is saying about this particular topic. So what's the theme of the book? You can't say it's about life. You can say what the author is trying to say about the life. For example, somebody might write a poetry about love, but that's the topic. But what is the author is saying about it? That it is ephemeral, that it is difficult to express, whatever. So that's the difference between topic versus theme. Okay, so that's the one thing that we need to appreciate. The second term is a basic literary term refers to plot. Okay, plot is basically what happens in the story or the story. So whatever is going on in the prose or is the narrative story, that's the plot or the action of the story. Now to understand the plot of a story, it's sometimes helpful to divide the story into different parts or segments. It's kind of like dividing the human body into different systems, or dividing a certain geographic area into different divisions so you can understand it. So plot is typically divided into categories such as this, okay? And it's usually represented like this. So for any given story, for example, there is a climax, right? So that's the climax. Okay, so that's the high point of the story. Now, when the story begins, you're a stranger to the people and characters. So the author has to give some idea, some background information. So that's called exposition. So exposition is basically giving the background information that's necessary for a person who's introduced to the story to understand. So the exposition can be in the beginning of the story, and it can continue throughout the rest of the plot. Okay, so exposition is just introducing the characters and familiarizing the reader to the layout of the plots of the people in the story, etc. So the background information at the beginning of the book. Okay, and then what happens is what develops is called rising action. Okay, so rising action is consists usually of some kind of conflict between the main characters in the story. So a story is nothing really without unless there's conflict in the story, right? Whether it be like the rabbit and the tortoise running the race, there has to be some tension or some conflict. So exposition is just introduction of giving background information. Rising action is setting a situation that there is conflict. The conflict might be internal, so a character might have conflict within themselves, or conflict might be external to the character from other people or from nature. For example, a character might be stranded in a desert. Then the conflict there arises actually between the character and their environment, correct? Or in a freezing Arctic cold, for example. If the conflict is other people, then that creates the rising action. Okay, the climax of the story occurs. When the climax of the story occurs when the protagonist, the main character, has to make a choice. Okay, so there is there comes a time when the main character or characters have to make a choice, and that's the climax. Okay, do you do this or do you do this? And the choice that they make will depend upon their future fate. Okay, and all the consequences that occur from the choice that they make at the climax, okay, will are called falling action. Falling action are all the results, side effects, so to speak, of the decisions that the main characters make at the climax. Okay, so this is falling action. And finally, when everything is settled down, and all the ends tied up, so to speak, and that's the end of the story, and that's the resolution of the story, also sometimes known as denouement, DENOUEMENT, denouement. That's how it's pronounced, a fancy term for resolution. So these are the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major parts of the plot or the storyline: exposition, giving background information, rising action, creation of a conflict, climax, where the main actors have to make a choice, and all the consequences from the choice results in falling action, and resolution or denouement is the ending of the story. Now, not all stories obviously follow this stereotypic classic pattern. There are variations in it, and sometimes climax is not necessarily the highlight of this of the story, and the real exciting part of the story may be the falling action, or the resolution or denouement, or what really happens in the end. The end might be shocking, for example, and that's like the big point of the story, etc. But this is the basic summary of the plot. Climax, or sometimes known as the turning point, right? Climax, the turning point. Okay, so these are the first 2 key terms. Another term that's a literary term, or you can use a concept that you can use to analyze literary work, is foreshadowing. Sometimes this can be very, very subtle indeed, and it's not readily apparent. Sometimes it can be very obvious. Foreshadowing is giving like a hint or a clue, okay, or clue as to what might happen in the future in the story, and it creates like a suspense. Is it really going to happen? Suspense and interest in the story. Sometimes these hints and clues are incorrect. They're red herrings, and so you can't always count on foreshadowing to be accurate. Sometimes authors intentionally mislead the reader to create excitement. And also foreshadowing just from the scene. Foreshadowing could be from anything. It could be an object, right? Or a symbol or color that's used. For example, if in a story and everybody's wearing things, and somebody comes in with distinctly red color clothes, I wonder what that means, right? So it's like that. So foreshadowing, it can be objects, or it can be scenes, it can be anything that gives a clue as to what can happen in the future. It may or may not be, but necessarily accurate. Okay, so when you talk about literary things, you use these terminology. Talk what's the theme of this work of literature. What's the plot like, and then you can talk about all these aspects of the plot. Is there any sense of foreshadowing, etc. All right, going on. Another way you can analyze a story is, of course, the characters. Characters are carry out the plot, of course. The main character is the protagonist. Okay, It's just the main character. They are usually like the heroes of the story. You don't have to be the right. The protagonist is the main character. Okay, and whoever opposes them is the antagonist. Okay. So protagonist and the antagonist. These terms, these protagonist usually has a positive connotation. Antagonist has a negative connotation, right? But they don't have to be in that way. Okay. Now, how do we learn about a character and how characters? Okay, so for example, here's a character in the story. How do we know who this person is like? Okay, one is we can think of it like internally, right? So we can learn about what a character is like by what they are thinking, right? So if the author gives an idea of what they're thinking, we know if this is like a good guy, bad person, good person, or noble person, or heartless person, selfish person, greedy person, or benevolent, etc. So we can find out what a character is like first by their thoughts, okay, right? And then by their words. So they speak something, right? They articulate something. What are they saying? So we can know about what the character is like by their thoughts, okay, and by their words. Thoughts translated into words. So thoughts translated into words, right? Because the author might not give us what they're thinking, but they might give us what they're saying. And words can translate into actions. Okay, so what the character does. So we can use the thoughts, words, and actions. So you pay attention to the thoughts, to the words, and the actions to understand what the character is like. Okay, we can also learn about the character by how what other people think about the character. Okay, what other people say about the character, right? And how other people interact with the character. So we can understand this character by looking at how other characters interact with that person and what they say and think about that person. Also, from a third point of view, you can by description of the author as to what the character is. So author can be revealing by the way they look, or by the descriptions of the author themselves can give us a lot about what a character is like. So if the question is, for example, what do you think about this person in the story? Well, how do you begin analyzing that person? First, you look at what they're thinking, what they're saying, what their actions are like, what other people are saying about them, what other people are thinking about them, how the other people interact with them, and what the author themselves describes this particular character. So when you want to do a character analysis, these are all the various things that you can look at. Okay, in general, characters can be described as round characters and flat characters. Okay, round characters are characters that are well developed in the story. In other words, we kind of can predict almost how they're going to behave because that's how well they're described in the story. Flat characters, on the other hand, or static characters, are not very well developed in the story. Okay, like the policeman. Really, who cares about the character of the policeman, right? So sometimes you have. I'm just saying as an example. So you don't have to develop the flat characters. So well-developed characters are called round characters, and not so well-developed characters are called flat characters. The most flat characters are stereotypes. Okay, like the evil stepmother. That's a stereotype. The stereotypes are useful for authors because, okay, if you say this is an evil stepmother, then everybody has a concept of what an evil stepmother is, right? So they don't have to make any effort at describing what the evil stepmothers are. So for authors, they're very useful in the writing because they all the work has been done for them from all the previous authors in all the centuries. So stereotypes are very flat characters, right? Round characters are very well developed, but you have to also keep in mind that any particular character, any character can be the same throughout the story. In other words, they don't change throughout the story, or they can develop, they can grow in the story, they can change in the story. Okay, so a character, even if they're well developed, can remain the same throughout the story. They don't change, like Sherlock Holmes. It's like Sherlock Holmes, right? He's pretty well developed, but he doesn't grow or change in a particular story. He just solves mysteries. So, but some characters can grow through the stories. Okay, and then sometimes you see one aspect of their character, and then then in the middle of the story, then you see there's a flip side to their character that you didn't even know. Okay, so characters don't necessarily have to remain the same throughout the story. So they can see one aspect of their story, and then the storyline changes, and then you see an entirely different aspect of that same character that you did not know or expect that way. So this is all about how characters, if you want to analyze characters, these are the terms that the language, the vocabulary that you can use to analyze characters. Okay. Another literary term that's important for us is setting. Setting is just where the story takes place, of course. Okay. Sometimes the setting is inconsequential. In other words, it's not relevant to the story. The same story could occur anywhere else, and sometimes the setting is crucial to the plot. And for example, if the guy, like the example I gave, a person dying of thirst in the middle of a desert, of course the setting is a very crucial element of that story, right? So sometimes setting is is not important. Sometimes the setting is very, very important. So you have to consider setting and how that affects the meaning and the whole interpretation of the work. And you can't take the setting as too very trivial, because you can always say, okay, why did the author choose this particular setting to say this particular story about this particular theme? Okay, so setting oftentimes gives a very important clue as to the big picture of the story. Okay, and another term is tone and mood. Apparently, there's a difference. Some people make a difference between these two terms, and some people use them as synonyms. And this is basically like author's attitude towards the work, and towards whom? Author's attitude towards whom? Towards the writing, of course, and the audience. Okay. Towards the writing and towards the audience. Okay. In other words, is the tone, is the mood, is it formal or informal? Okay. Is it satirical? Okay. Is it or is it very subjective or objective? Okay. Is it funny? Is it humorous? So this is very important, obviously, right? And an author's tone and mood has a lot to say about the overall meaning of what they're trying to say. Okay, is it intimate or is it distant? Okay, let's say humorous or playful, for example. And a very different attitude. Now, for example, you read Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. You see that she once in a while she says things that are kind of funny, and she's talking about some overall about people's feelings, and people are hurt and some people are mean, but from time to time you can see she doesn't just focus on the negative aspect of life. She also injects humor, and that tells you that, hey, don't take life too seriously, and that's some element of her of the theme that she's trying to express. So and then you say, well, how do we figure out what the author's tone or mood of the work is, right? How do we know? If sometimes writing is very formal, and you can just see it's like, okay, this guy's this is like a very formal presentation. And how do the authors express all of these, right? Well, they do it they use literary devices such as diction. What kind of language? They use big fancy words, formal words, imagery, symbolism, etc. So authors are able to achieve these objectives, kind of maintain a certain mood by using other literary terms such as diction, imagery, symbolism, etc. Okay, so that's the tone and that's the mood. A tone or mood, okay? Okay. Now, moving on. Next is narrator, or narrator, and speaker. These are synonymous terms, but narrator is used for prose and speaker is used for poetry, typically, apparently, okay? And neither of this is to be confused with, these are not the same as author, okay? Um, okay, narrator, speaker are not the same as author. For example, in Moby Dick, okay? In Moby Dick, the first line is "Call me Ishmael." Okay, that's the narrator. That's not the author. It's some dude that's telling the story. Okay, so the person who's relating the story is the. It may be one of the characters. Okay, it may be one of the characters in the story. It may be an important character or a trivial character, right? Or it may not be a character in the story at all. Okay, it may be somebody just telling the story. But the narrator is not the same as author. Okay, narrator is telling the person telling the story. The narrator may be a monster telling the story about their history of monsters or something like that. You follow? So narrators, whoever is relating the story, fictional or real. Okay, and they could be a character involved in the story or not involved in the story at all. Okay. Okay, another aspect to consider is point of view. Okay. Okay. Now this means sometimes, for example, you kind of know what's happening in every person's head. So the author tells, okay, this person is thinking this. Okay. So we know what they're thinking, and this person, at the same time is thinking this, and this person is at the same time is thinking this. So author is telling us everybody's thinking. It's like author is able to go in everybody's mind, right? So this point of view, where the reader knows what's going on in everybody's mind, that's called an omniscient point of view. Omniscient, right? All-knowing. Which is a very interesting thing, because this never happens in real life, but we do this in writing, right? So in writing, we never. It's not even. Doesn't even seem unnatural to us that we are reading something that's really impossible from a human point of view to be able to get into everybody's mind, right? So, we're so used to it, we don't even think that it's unnatural. But anyways, omniscient point of view means that that we know what's in everybody's mind. Okay, that's omniscient. Okay. And then there's omniscient limited. Okay, that means that we know, okay, what's going on in one person's minds and thoughts, one of the characters. Okay, so this is omniscient limited. So if you know what's going on in everybody's mind in the story, what they're thinking, etc., that's omniscient. Okay, omniscient limited is you know what's going on in one person's mind, and they're running commentary, and you don't know what's going on in other people's mind in the story. Okay, so that's that. This is like third person omniscient. Okay, so like third person omniscient. And then there is first person view, and then there is first person, okay, first person limited. Okay, now the difference here is, okay, we know what the narrator is thinking. So okay, but narrator may not be part of the story. Okay, in omniscient limited, the thoughts that we know are as a character in the story. In first person, all we know is how this person is describing and what they think about the character, etc. And this is the narrator. So all we know is who the narrator is, and the narrator may not be involved in the plot at all. That's first person. Okay, and it says I. Call me Ishmael, for example, right? I did this, I did that. So this is a first person who's telling the story. They may not be part of the story at all. Whereas a third person omniscient is telling the story, but you are able to get into the minds of one of the characters. Okay, so that's point of view, different points of view that you can use to analyze also literary works. Okay. Now, the rest of the terms relate more to poetry, so I'm going to take a break here and then continue after a brief pause with the remaining of the literary terms. Until next time, then, assalamu alaikum.